posted on Connor Strong's website for future. So we'll email out the slides and then the recording for everybody to see.
Thank you. So Sasha and I are excited to talk about how to help your teen tackle anxiety today. Before we get into that, I am going to hand it over to Katie for a introduction from Connor Strong.
Thank you guys, first off, so much for partnering with us and doing these workshops. This is our second one of the fall series, and just it's so inspiring just what you learn here in this short 60 minutes. So we appreciate you so much. For those of you who don't know, Connor Strong is a local nonprofit that specializes in mental health awareness and suicide prevention. It was founded by the Warros family, Tom and Mindy Warros, when they lost their son Connor to suicide. And the main goal is just to make sure that no other family should have to go through the pain that they went through. So they've taken, a great deal of time and effort to put together partnerships like GMU and other resources with community mental health leaders and accredited programs like Sources of Strength that we sponsor in the local elementary, middle, and high schools, just to help make sure that all of our youth know that they have resources, know that there is somewhere to go to help, know that they are not alone in whatever they're feeling. There's always somebody who has felt that way, and that they are not alone in their struggles. So again, thank you guys so much for putting this on for us tonight. I appreciate it, and I look forward to learning something, because every time I learn something new. So thank you guys so much.
Thank you, Katie. And again, we're so thrilled to be here. Just by way of introduction, we want tonight to be really interactive, so feel free to put some messages in the chat. I think they might go directly to me and Sasha, so I'll be sure to read those out as they come in, but we're going to be asking for your participation, so feel free to unmute and share if you feel comfortable doing so. So for tonight, we are going to talk about what anxiety is. I know it's a term that all of us are familiar with. We hear it thrown around a lot. If you all have seen Inside Out 2, she's her own character in that movie. And so we want to just give a background on what kinds of things we're talking about when we talk about anxiety, how to recognize when it's a problem, what sorts of things make anxiety worse, and then importantly, what you can do as a parent to help your child, to respond to them and to support them through what they're experiencing.
Okay, so let's get into it. So we've got good news and we've got bad news. And a lot of times we like to start out with the bad news so we can follow with the good news. So bad news is anxiety disorders are one of the most common mental health concerns for children and adolescents. And we know that anxiety can cause problems in school, with friends and interpersonal relationships, and also at home. However, the good news is that anxiety is one of the most treatable conditions. So we know how to help. And we'll get much more into that as we go through today's presentation. So first, let's talk briefly about where anxiety comes from. So there are a lot of different factors that can cause and contribute to anxiety. So we can think about childhood events, genetics, environmental stressors, different family contexts. However, no matter where that anxiety comes from, the strategies that we use to treat it are pretty much the same. Okay, so what exactly is anxiety? Abby gave that great example from Inside Out 2. We'll talk a little bit more for those that maybe haven't seen the movie, how we like to conceptualize anxiety. So we think of anxiety as the body's natural alarm system. So for example, this is a question for all of you if somebody wants to put their answer in the chat or raise their hand and come off mute. What would happen if you saw, say, a bear in the woods and you did not feel any anxiety at all, what would happen? Or would that be a good thing? We'll wait a few more seconds in case somebody wants to answer in the chat. And if nobody's feeling brave enough just yet, I'll actually ask Abby, what do you think?
Well, it would be a very bad thing. You'd probably be in an unsafe situation.
Yes, wonderful answer. Thank you. So yeah, if we saw a bear in the woods and we didn't feel any anxiety at all, that might not be so great for us because that's a situation where we're actually in danger and we need that body's natural alarm system to keep us safe and to tell us, hey, you should get out of this situation. You should remove yourself from this dangerous situation, right? But sometimes with anxiety, it gets to be a problem when our alarm system is a little too sensitive. So we can think about experiences that we've had in life with alarms that are too sensitive, like say a smoke alarm or a car alarm. What happens when those alarms are too sensitive? If anybody wants to call out or share in the chat.
Oh, I've had car alarms that are too sensitive that go off at all hours of the night. Oh yeah,
Right.
we
So
love
the car,
those.
yes, thank you for sharing. Yeah, so the car alarm is supposed to let us know if somebody's trying to break into our car, but instead it's letting us know that the wind is blowing a little too hard. And so it's not super helpful at that point. Our alarm is going off when we don't actually need it to go off. So we want to be able to recognize when anxiety is giving us that false alarm. Or another way to think of that is when the anxiety is really big, even though the threat is very small or even non-existent. And we want to be able to practice moving forward with coping skills. And Abby will explain more on that later. So now let's talk a little bit about the three parts of anxiety. So sometimes when we think about anxiety, we think of, oh, worry, it's in our heads. However, there are three different parts that we're going to talk about today. So we're going to talk about thoughts, behaviors, and physical sensations. All three of these are part of anxiety. So first, let's take a look at some anxious ways of thinking. Anxiety can make us think in a very specific way. So here are some examples of some anxious thoughts that somebody might say, or that you as parents might even have heard your teens say. So we see, if I fail this test, I'm going to fail this class, and then I'm never going to get into college. We have another example. Everyone can tell that I'm nervous, and they're all going to think I'm weird. Or if I don't make this team, it means I'm terrible at sports. Do any of these statements sound like somewhat familiar, the way that anxiety can sound? I see a couple nods. Yeah. So a lot of times anxiety tells us that things will be absolutely catastrophic. So when we see this example of, if I fail this test, I'm going to fail the class, I'm never going to get into college. Anxiety tells us if one thing goes wrong, everything's going wrong, and it's going to be an absolute catastrophe. We also like to keep an eye out for extreme language when we're talking about, or when we're listening for anxiety, words like never, always, everyone. So for example, everyone can tell I'm nervous. They all think I'm weird. That's a pretty extreme language that we're seeing there. Another way that anxiety can show up in our thoughts is that sort of mind reading that's happening there. So everyone can tell I'm nervous and they all think I'm weird. So assuming that we know what others are thinking. And then lastly, we see this example with the sports. If I don't make the team, it means I'm terrible at sports. Anxiety likes to tell us that things are very black or white, that they're good or bad, yes or no. Whereas usually reality is somewhere in the gray, somewhere in between. So now let's talk a little bit about anxiety in the body. So we talked about how anxiety can come through in our thoughts, in our body, anxiety can make us feel really specific ways. It can cause fast heartbeat, tension in our shoulders and our stomach, headache, sweating, or feeling hot. All of these may be those sort of physical manifestations of anxiety. So those were our first two parts. Let's talk about our third component, which was behavior. So when we think about anxious behaviors, these are behaviors that typically show up as either avoiding or over preparing for something instead of facing the fear and trusting your ability to cope. So a few examples of what this could look like, or what you may have seen, anxious behaviors you might have seen your teen do. This could look like taking forever to make a decision, going back and forth and second guessing and doubting your ability to make the best decision. It could also look like trying to problem solve every possible worst case scenario. Or it could look like procrastinating on a task or a project for fear that you won't be able to do it just perfectly. You might make a mistake, and so avoiding it entirely. So the big thing to sort of recognize with these anxious behaviors is that they stop us from facing the fear and trusting our ability to cope and handle the situation. So next, I want to talk through what can make anxiety worse. So we're familiar now with the three components of anxiety: the thoughts, the feelings, the behaviors, or rather the thoughts, the physical sensations, and the behaviors. So let's talk about how this might play out in the environment, and again, what might make it worse. So we're going to start our little cycle here at the trigger on the top right side. So let's imagine a scenario where your teen is anxious about giving a class presentation, and then they're giving this presentation and one of their classmates yawns during the presentation. So we have this trigger. I'm nervous about giving this presentation. I just made eye contact with somebody in the audience and they're yawning. What might be some anxious thoughts that would come up if you were giving a presentation and you saw somebody yawn? What might you be worried about? Feel free to share in the chat or raise your hand or call out.
I'm seeing a message in the chat that they could be bored.
Yeah, so seeing that yawn as a threat, oh my gosh, this means my presentation's boring. This person is so bored with my presentation. Yeah, that's a great example. So now,
Interested.
yeah, they're not interested. Yeah, great example. Anything else?
How about just I'm a terrible presenter?
Yeah, so thinking it has something to do with you as a person. Okay, they yawned. I must be a terrible presenter. Yeah, so we viewed this yawn as a threat. We're feeling super high anxiety. And then there is this tendency to respond by either avoiding or over preparing. So in this scenario, let's imagine that the teen chooses to avoid. They say, I'm never giving a presentation in class ever again. And then teacher responds by saying, oh, that's okay. You can submit a 5-page paper and you don't have to present in class. And so that's where we see this no corrective experience. What that means is that the teacher has responded in a way that is allowing the teen to continue avoiding the presentation. And then let's say teen continues to do this every semester until they graduate and they never have to give a presentation. We never have that corrective experience. And the anxiety of giving a presentation just grows and grows and grows based on that one experience of that person yawning. It means I'm a terrible presenter. My presentation's boring. So let's rewind and let's think. Let's imagine teen is anxious again. They're giving the presentation and they see somebody yawn. What are some other potential ways that we might interpret that yawn? That aren't seeing, ways that don't see that yawn as a threat.
How about that other kid was up all night preparing their own presentation?
Absolutely. Yeah, we could definitely interpret that yawn as having nothing to do with us. That kid stayed up late. they're preparing their own presentation. That makes sense. So we can see how, oh, sorry, Abby, were there any other responses in the chat? Okay.
Not seeing any.
Okay. So we can see how in that situation, the cycle is actually broken. And instead of making the anxiety worse, we were able to view that yawn a little bit differently, interrupt that cycle, and the teen could continue with their presentation, facing their fear that maybe they are anxious to present, but not being encouraged to avoid it and not interpreting those sort of outside responses as threats. Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit more about how parents might respond to encourage teens to handle their anxiety and responses that may be more helpful or potentially less helpful.
Okay, so sometimes in an attempt to help their teens overcome anxiety that they're experiencing, parents can respond in one of two ways. We think of this first way over on one end of the spectrum as over demanding. So that could be statements like, there's nothing to be worried about. You need to be able to deal with this. These are statements that it's a very natural way of responding, and it can also come off as pretty invalidating to a teen of their emotions or their experience. A teen may feel like they're misunderstood or really overwhelmed and having to manage what they're going through by themselves rather than feeling supported or encouraged. And as a result, it can sometimes hurt the relationship between a parent and a teen if these statements are happening over and over. On the other end of the spectrum, we have what we call these overprotecting statements. So these are things like saying, I can see that this is too much for you. Let me help you take care of it. Let me do this for you. And this is, again, a very natural response, right? Seeing your kid having a really negative experience and wanting to take that away for them. And it can also unintentionally reinforce avoidance by teaching kids that they actually can't handle it, right? By trying to protect them from everything, it's telling them that they can't manage it on their own. And so that can have negative consequences for them too, because you can't always be there to manage it, and these feelings happen. And so I'm curious, looking at this, whether you all find yourselves leaning in one direction or the other, if you're comfortable sharing or responding in the chat. I saw someone respond both ways. Absolutely. Yeah, it might depend on the circumstance or the context of that anxiety.
You know what, thinking about it, I think I've gone one of two ways depending on my child. I have two sons, and I respond one way with that one and one way with the other.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for sharing that.
I remember also with my kids, a lot of the trying to be reassuring, especially that there's nothing to be worried about, you can do it. So where that line was between kind of reinforcing the anxiety versus trying to be reassuring, I remember was really tough as a parent.
Yeah, thank you. I'm seeing another response in the chat saying things like, you shouldn't worry about it. You're well prepared and you're going to do well. So I think that speaks to that line of encouragement and potentially over demanding. Yeah. So thank you all so much for sharing. And again, I want to emphasize that these are are really natural ways to respond. It makes a lot of sense. And also, there are times that this might be more unhelpful, and perhaps you've seen for yourself how it might have been unhelpful in certain situations. And so we'll talk about some things that can be helpful in terms of responding to your teen's anxiety. So with that, one of the most important steps is being able to recognize those signs of anxiety, recognizing maybe some patterns that your teen might have. As Sasha talked about, those anxious thoughts, the physical symptoms that come along with it, maybe things like complaining about a stomach ache every time something comes up at school, anxious behaviors, the over preparation and avoidance behaviors. And we'll talk about how to respond with validation and encouraging healthy coping. So I'm going to talk about that on the next slide. The goal with this is to approach the anxiety rather than avoiding. When we avoid anxiety or help our child avoid anxiety, we're continuing that cycle that Sasha mentioned by teaching them that anxiety is harmful and needs to be avoided. And by approaching, we can interrupt that cycle of anxiety and help to change some of those anxious thoughts and behaviors to more helpful ones. And again, for anyone who's seen Inside Out 2, as you probably remember, it didn't work very well when anxiety was avoided and pushed aside. So again, that approach is really important. So I would like to now take a look at some statements that parents might respond with, and brainstorm whether we think those statements might be, whether they seem like over demanding statements or over protecting statements. So I'm focusing right now these ones on the left. So this first one of, let me take care of this for you, you're too stressed. Does that seem overprotecting, over demanding? Overprotecting, I'm seeing. Yeah, absolutely. That sense of, oh, well, let me take away this anxiety for you. So on the right here is another example of something else that you might say that really gets at that validation of the emotion and then encouraging coping. So something like, this is really difficult and I know that you can handle tough things. So looking at this next one, this isn't that big of a deal. Overprotecting, over demanding. What do we think? I'm seeing over demanding. Yeah. Again, that's a statement that might be said with the intent of decreasing that anxiety, and it may also come off as a little invalidating to a kid. So an alternative response might be something like, I see you're feeling anxious. I see you're feeling nervous. Again, validating that emotion that you're seeing in your child. And I know that you can get through this. And then this third example, there's no need to be worried. Just do it. Overprotecting, over demanding. Any thoughts? Okay, I'm seeing over demanding in the chat. Yeah. Exactly. And so an alternative response here might be something like, it makes sense that you're worried, and I know that you have the ability to manage it. These are just some examples of different responses that get at those two pieces of the validation and encouragement of coping. And they're just examples. And so you might find your own ways of responding with that validation and encouragement of coping that feels authentic to you and feels right with your child. Maybe your child has something that they really want to hear in those statements that, or in those situations that they're feeling anxious. And so that could be a conversation that you have with them too. Right, so moving on from some of those responses, we also wanted to talk about some specific strategies that you encourage your teen to use. Did someone have a question?
I actually do real fast. Going back to that previous slide, do you think that it is appropriate when they're doing, like, this isn't a big deal, do you then step in and try and offer help? Or do you think that offering help, even in just like that maybe small way, leads to that avoidance?
That's a great question. And I think that it can depend on the circumstance. And also, so if I'm understanding your question correctly, when you're saying that, when you're providing that statement to them, whether you might pair that with help. And I think that's something that you can offer with your teen in those situations, saying like, would you like me to provide some ideas? Or I'm here if you want to talk about some ideas. So that might be a third step that you pair that with. So that validation, I know that you're nervous and I know you can get through this. Would you like to talk about how to get through this? Just providing a little bit of that extra support for them if that's something that they're looking for in that situation. And I do think that that's distinct from saying, let me do this for you, let me take care of this. It's a kind of intermediate step there. Does that answer your question?
It does, thank you.
All right, so some specific strategies that I'd like to mention here. So this might include, these are some things, we'll provide some examples, but these are some things that you might brainstorm with your teen, what their go-to strategies are that are helpful for them. Or they might find it helpful to make a note on their phone of some different of their go-to strategies that they can pull up in moments of anxiety, just to remove that extra step of needing to think through things. So first, some relaxation strategies. There's a ton out there that I'm sure you all have seen before in various forms of breathing exercises, body scans, meditation, and then coping strategies, things like listening to music, drawing, coloring, going for a walk outside, other calming, relaxing activities. And then finally, social support, people that they can go to in times that they're feeling really stressed or anxious, friends that they can talk to about it, family members. Yeah, so these are also, I think, helpful to have a conversation about and see how it fits for you and for your team. And then finally, what or when might you need more help? These are a few things that we look for, especially clinically, when anxiety might be rising to that level that we're concerned about. So having excessive worry that's interfering with getting through the day, completing daily tasks, somebody having difficulty controlling their worries, having problems focusing at school, at home, and other activities, difficulties with sleep, irritability, changes in school performance. So that might be in grades and attendance, withdrawing from different activities or not finding things fun that they used to find fun. So these are some times that it, or some signs that it might be time for additional support. And so where do you get that additional support? Not surprisingly, based on Sasha and I's background, therapy is one of those. And so we recommend, if you're seeking therapy, looking for cognitive behavioral therapy. That's a skills-based approach that's focused on breaking those cycles of thoughts, feelings, and behaviors that we talked about. And you can also often find online, if a therapist is trained in CBT, wonderful resources in schools. And then we've also listed a few other resources here that you can check out, including our Center for Community Mental Health. And finally, we wanted to mention a few books, because I know that can be, some people prefer books as resources. And there's a list here of books that we recommend for parents and for teens. These are just books that we like, no relationship to the authors or anything like that. So just some things that you may find helpful.
Again, these slides will be available after, so if you didn't snapshot it right now, we'll get this list to you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the reminder, Katie. And so with that, we wanted to leave plenty of time for any questions that you all might have. Thank you so much for your participation in the chat and for being here. We really welcome any questions that you might have about anything that we talked about today. And I'll keep monitoring the chat in case anyone feels more comfortable putting their question there.
So I'll start with one real quick. Going back to, again, the avoiding of the problem because it causes anxiety. I guess my default sometimes is that over demanding, that tough love, It's like, oh, well, you just got to suck it and deal with it because that's just life. It doesn't really work that well. So I appreciate you guys actually calling it out for what it is, instead of me thinking that I'm being helpful, because I'm not. And I appreciate you guys pointing that out. Thank you so much. I will learn and work on rephrasing my responses like that.
And I'll just mention here, I think that that speaks directly to the point that Robin made earlier about how sometimes it feels like we're being reassuring when we're saying, oh, hey, this actually isn't a big deal. Don't worry about it. You just suck it up. This is life. It feels helpful in the moment. And so, not shaming yourself for maybe having responded that way, but just knowing that, yeah, maybe our intent doesn't quite match the impact. Maybe the impact is that we invalidated their feelings. And so shifting toward that, encouraging coping, validating the emotion and encouraging coping.
I actually wonder if you guys can speak a little bit towards, I mean, we do live here in Fairfax County, Loudoun County, the whole area. I think almost every teen now says, I'm stressed, I'm anxious, and I'm just wondering if the parents who are here tonight, if there's any kind of guide for, what they can do and determining the difference between being really stressed versus actually developing anxiety. What do you guys think?
So I can say a few words, and then Abby, if you want to follow up. So this kind of goes back to when we were discussing what is the threat and then what is the response. So for example, if there is, a really big project, this is their end of semester project, they care a lot about it. It makes sense that that's stressful. We would want to pay attention to, is that stress interfering significantly with their functioning in potentially multiple areas in their life for an extended period of time? Is it, losing sleep for multiple nights about this? Is it, holding so much physical tension that we're getting stomach aches? So kind of looking at, yeah, how intense and how long is this anxiety or this worry going on for? Because what we don't want to do is think that any moment of stress is a bad thing or a problem. Because we talked about how anxiety can be the body's natural alarm. We gave the example of, being in the forest and there's a bear. Um, However, one of the things that we didn't speak to that is also true is that sometimes that stress in smaller doses can be motivating. It can show us that we care about something, that we want to perform well. And so, as long as it's coming out in those ways that's adaptive, we can see that the stress isn't necessarily doing a lot of harm. So, we would be looking out for that sort of other situation that I was describing. Is there anything you wanted to add to that, Abby?
No, I think that was great. And I think I just want to echo too that it can be really hard when there's a lot of those external stressors and pressures that are put on teens. And so I recognize that that can be a really hard thing to manage. Yeah. Seeing two other questions in the chat that I'll read out. So one of them, my daughter thinks that she's not good at sports and we keep pushing her to try one. Any suggestions on how to do this? So I guess I'll start with that question. So yeah, thank you so much. That's an excellent question. I want to preface this by saying that I, not knowing your daughter or this situation, I can't speak exactly on what you should do in that case. And also it might be a situation, just thinking about some of those responses. What is the thing about sports that she's really worried about? There can be lots of different things that somebody may be worried about related to trying sports. And so figuring out what that is for her, and how you might collaborate to or work with her to sort of address some of those concerns that she's having. Again, providing that role of support without taking it away entirely. And also, this might be different families have different values. So maybe it's a decision that a family could come to that's not worth it for them. And so they don't want to be involved in that activity that's causing stress anymore. So there can be lots of different ways managing it. And again, without knowing the exact details of this situation, there's only so much that I can speak to. But I hope that helps a little bit in terms of sort of approaching those conversations with her, and understanding a little bit about what might be going on specifically for her.
I just wanted to add briefly, great point, Abby, about figuring out what exactly is it about doing the sport that is so anxiety inducing. That can make it a lot easier to figure out how to respond in a way that is validating and that encourages that coping. Because if we just generally know sort of vaguely like, okay, my kid doesn't want to play sports, don't know why, but I'll just tell them to, that they can do it. That might not be as effective as if we know, for example, okay, my teen does not want to try out for soccer because she's afraid of missing that first kick and her friend's not talking to her. That's a very specific situation, right? And we could provide much more validation, more targeted validation, and targeted coping strategies that are specific to that situation. So, exactly what Abby said. Just wanted to echo that.
Thank you, Sasha. Seeing another question in the chat. How to manage our teenage daughter when we have another person who doesn't believe in anxiety. My mother-in-law has a different background, and it's hard for us to be on the same page with her, how to make her understand that anxiety is real and can happen to her granddaughter. Thank you so much for that question. Sasha, do you want to start and I'll jump in?
Sure. First, I just wanted to say that this is a very real situation for a lot of people. Some people in the like in our immediate family environment or social networks are supportive of sort of mental health, we're just recognizing mental health generally, and then others might be downplaying it. And so it can feel tough when we feel like we are being supportive and others in the environment are almost like taking away from it. I think that my inclination here would be to, assuming that there's only so much that's in your control with getting other family members on board with the importance of mental health or the reality of anxiety, trying to do that where it's possible, but knowing that there are limits and just focusing on that you can be that person showing that support and encouraging that coping and offering that validation. Even if your teen isn't able to get that elsewhere, they can get it from you consistently, and that can help them build up those coping strategies. And sometimes those coping strategies can include, how do I react and how do I cope when my environment is being invalidating to my experience of anxiety?
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, and sometimes managing to that end, managing or figuring out coping strategies to use in an invalidating environment. So that might be something that you do. And there are also it can be helpful too in approaching some of those conversations with family members who may not have the same understanding of mental health or anxiety, kind of meeting them where they're at in those conversations. And so for some people, those physical symptoms of anxiety might be a little bit easier to grasp. So talking about those, like the stomach aches, the headaches, those other physical sensations that we associate with anxiety, and how to address those physical symptoms or those problems that your child may be having, approaching that conversation from that standpoint might just resonate or a little bit more with somebody. So that's something you can do, or finding resources online that are that feel relevant to that person and their cultural background. So those are some ways you can navigate that situation too, because those, like Sasha was saying, that's very real, and those are really can be really challenging conversations to have. Yeah. Any other questions, comments, thoughts that are coming up for folks? Again, feel free to unmute or drop it in the chat.
If anyone has other questions, definitely drop it in the chat for Abby and Sasha, or unmute. You guys, thank you so much. I did want to just add too that, and by the way, for those who don't know me, I'm Robin Mellenbeck. I'm the director for the George Mason Center for Community Mental Health, and I have the pleasure of working with Abby and Sasha on a regular basis. So, thinking about how do you help your children with anxiety, even just starting, whether it's family members, whether it's yourself. I mean, remember that most people want the best for your teens, whether it's extended family members, whether it's other people that are in your social circles. Most people want what's best. And when teens show distress, our natural inclination is to fix it. And yet, as you've heard tonight from Abby and Sasha, that's not always in their best interest. It's helping them figure out how to address it. And so hopefully some of the skills, that they talked about, particularly the ways to address talking with your teens about it, resonate. But if there are other questions, feel free to email us.
Hey,
I'm sorry, did somebody have a question? No? Okay. And are you guys going to show the slide about the parenting skills group?
I will
Of course.
have two more slides to show, so I will do that now. All right, so Sasha and I will be leading a parenting skills group for parents who are wanting to build up their skills to manage their child's ADHD or other behavioral challenges that they may be experiencing. We say parents of elementary school children here, but we're actually expanding it. So it'll be elementary and middle school children at the Center for Community Mental Health. So feel free to reach out by email down here or by phone to find out more. And we would so love to have you there. So yeah, feel free to reach out to us.
All right. And then the next workshop, because this is a monthly series, is really going to be dealing a little bit with coping with grief during the holidays. So feel free to share this widely. It's free as always. And we hope you got some good takeaways from tonight. And Abby and Sasha will hang around for a few minutes as well to answer any questions that maybe you might not have wanted to share with the whole group. But thank you all very much.
Thank
I will
you.
just hop on and say thank you so much on behalf of Connor Strong for everybody being here tonight. And thank you guys so much. It was a wonderful presentation, absolutely wonderful. You guys do a great job. Every month you knock it out of the park. So thank you so much for taking the time to put this on for us and all of your hard work going into it. And we value that so much.
Thank you. We really appreciate you all.
Looks like